have to be honest with you. This isn't just a story. This is something that happened to me, a part of my life I've had to claw my way back from. It's a hard thing to talk about, but I think it needs to be told. The beginning of the end came in a stark white envelope, delivered by a certified mail carrier, who looked at me with a sad, knowing pity I wouldn't understand for another 10 minutes. Inside, the heavy cream-colored paper felt impossibly cold in my hands, even on that sweltering Austin afternoon when the air itself felt like a wet blanket. It was a notice of default and intent to foreclose, and as my eyes scanned the dense legal text, my partner Liam's voice, a casual, almost breezy tone from across the living room, sliced through my disbelief. "Oh, that," he said, not even looking up from his laptop where he was scrolling through what looked like architectural designs for a new office. "Yeah, I had to take out a second mortgage for the new venture capital round. The paperwork was a bit of a rush." I looked from the paper with my name and what looked eerily, sickeningly like my signature on it, to him, the man I had built a home with for 7 years. My voice was a whisper, lost in the hum of the air conditioner. "Liam, I never signed this." He finally looked up then, a small, dismissive smile playing on his lips as he pushed his glasses up his nose. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't be so dramatic, Chloe. I signed for you. It was just easier that way." If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The silence that followed his confession was a living thing. It filled the space between us, thick and suffocating, pressing in on my ears. It was the sound of 7 years shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Our home, a charming little 1940s bungalow in the Zilker neighborhood of Austin, had been our sanctuary, our shared project. We'd spent weekends painting the shutters a cheerful sky blue, planting rosemary bushes along the walkway that always smelled incredible after a rainstorm, and dreaming of the life we would build within its walls. I was a graphic designer with a stable, fulfilling job at a downtown firm, finding satisfaction in clean lines and perfect color palettes. He was the charismatic founder of a tech startup, the visionary, the big thinker, a man who spoke about algorithms and user acquisition with the passion of a poet. That was always our dynamic. I was the steady earth. He was the brilliant, unpredictable sky. He handled the big picture, a vague and ever-expanding portfolio that I now realized included our finances. "Don't worry about the mortgage, babe," he'd say, tapping the side of my head playfully. "Leave the boring numbers to me. You just focus on making the world beautiful." I'd trusted him, implicitly, stupidly, with the kind of blind faith you only give someone once in your life. I'd trusted him. Now, that trust was a corpse at my feet, and he was the one holding the bloody knife, looking at me as if I were the one overreacting. My mind raced backward, a frantic, desperate scramble to find the signs I must have missed, the red flags I'd painted over in beige. The last few months had been strained. Liam had become more distant, an island in our shared home, his eyes perpetually glued to his phone, his nights filled with the frantic clicking of his keyboard and muttered conference calls he'd take on the back porch. He'd lost a major investor, I knew that much, but he'd brushed it off with his usual, unshakable, almost pathological optimism. "It's a pivot, Chloe, not a setback," he'd insisted, his voice ringing with a confidence I now understood was pure performance. "The next round of funding is right around the corner. We're going to be bigger than ever." There were other things, small, dissonant notes in the symphony of our life. The hushed, angry phone calls that would end the second I walked into a room. The way he'd started deflecting any questions about his company's finances with a vague, condescending, "It's complicated, you wouldn't understand." He'd even changed the password on our shared banking app, claiming it was a new security protocol from the bank. When I'd asked for the new one, he'd smiled that disarming smile that used to make my heart flutter and said, "I'll get to it. Just been so slammed, honey." I let it go. I always let it go, choosing to believe in the brilliant man I loved rather than the worrying evidence in front of my face. Now, that single piece of paper in my hand was a Rosetta Stone, translating all those small anxieties, all those dismissed gut feelings, into a terrifying, coherent language. He hadn't just been stressed, he had been drowning in debt and deceit. And instead of reaching for a life raft, he had decided to use my life, my name, my financial future as an anchor to hold himself steady, not caring if it pulled me under to the bottom of the ocean. "How much?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the hurricane of emotion churning in my gut. He finally closed his laptop with a soft click. The air of nonchalance dropped, replaced by a weary, almost put-upon sigh, as if I were the one inconveniencing him with my pesky questions about our impending homelessness. It was $150,000, Chloe, a bridge loan, just to get us through to the next quarter. The money from the Series B funding will cover it tenfold. He said us. He said get us through. He said it as if we were a team, as if this were a decision we had made together around the kitchen table instead of a felony he had committed in secret against me. The forgery, the sheer, calculated audacity of it. He had practiced my signature. I was sure of it. He had studied the way I looped my C and crossed my E, and then calmly, with a steady hand, he had signed my life away. The betrayal was so profound it felt physical, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I thought about the loan officer, the notary, the faceless people at Frostbank who had processed this. They had looked at a forgery and seen me. They had handed a stranger a fortune, and now they were coming to collect it from me. I was no longer Chloe Evans, graphic designer, homeowner, partner. I was a debtor. I was a name on a foreclosure notice. I was a problem to be solved. That first night was a blur of hollow-eyed shock. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. The rage hadn't come yet. I was still in the cold, deep water of disbelief, my body in shock. Liam tried to smooth it over, reverting to the charming, persuasive man I had fallen in love with, the man who could sell ice to an Eskimo and convince you it was a good deal. He made promises. He spun tales of future wealth, of how this would all be a funny story we'd tell one day. From the deck of our yacht in the Mediterranean, he was trying to sell me a fantasy future to distract me from the wreckage he had made of our present. "Think of it as an investment in us," he pleaded, reaching for my hand. I pulled away like I'd been burned. His touch felt like a violation, his skin crawling with lies. I locked myself in the guest room, the one room that didn't feel contaminated by his presence, and I sat on the floor with my laptop, my fingers trembling as I typed in the web address for a credit reporting agency. I needed to know the full extent of the damage. I needed to see the entire iceberg, not just the monstrous tip that had just ripped a hole in the side of my life. I filled in my personal information, my hands shaking so badly I had to retype my social security number 3 times. The page loaded, a progress bar filling with agonizing slowness, and then the screen glowed in the dark room, illuminating the true, staggering scale of his deceit. It wasn't just the second mortgage. There were 3 credit cards, all opened in the last 4 months, all in my name, with my pristine credit history as the foundation. American Express Platinum, Chase Sapphire Reserve, cards with exorbitant annual fees and credit limits I could never have qualified for on my own. They were all maxed out. Dinners at Uchi and Jeffrey's, the finest, most expensive restaurants in Austin, places he'd told me were investor meetings. A weekend trip to a luxury resort in Napa Valley he'd claimed was a company retreat for which I'd packed him a bag, blissfully unaware I was paying for it. a charge for over $10,000 at a high-end watch boutique on South Congress Avenue, a Rolex he was now wearing on his wrist, a glittering symbol of my ruin. I saw charges for clothes from By George, bar tabs from the W Hotel, even a subscription to a bespoke Whiskey of the Month club, and then the final crushing blow, a personal loan from a different bank for $50,000. The purpose listed on the application was home renovations. There had been no renovations. There was only a gaping, ever-widening maw of debt. I scrolled down, my breath catching in my throat, until I reached the bottom of the page. The number stared back at me, cold and unforgiving. Including the mortgage, he had stolen over $300,000 in my name. I was financially ruined. And the man sleeping in the next room, the man who had kissed me goodnight just 2 days earlier, had been the architect of it all. The calm finally broke. A single dry sob escaped my lips, a sound of pure desolation in the suffocating silence of the house. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a mistake to be fixed. This was a war to be fought. And I had no idea how I was going to win. He had taken everything, and all I had left was the cold, terrifying certainty that if I didn't fight back, the foreclosure notice was just the beginning of my descent into a hell he had personally designed for me. The next morning, I moved like an automaton through a world that had lost its color and sharp edges. I packed a single duffel bag with essentials, clothes, my laptop, my toothbrush, my hands moving with a purpose my mind didn't yet possess. Liam was in the kitchen, making coffee with our fancy Chemex brewer, acting as if it were just another Tuesday. He looked up and smiled when I walked in, bag in hand. The casual domesticity of the scene was so grotesquely at odds with the reality of our situation that it made me feel nauseous. "Leaving?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe. Where are you even going to go?" It was a calculated cruelty, a verbal jab designed to remind me of how intertwined our lives were, how much he believed I needed him, that my life was impossible to detangle from his. "I'm going to my sister's," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need some space to think." He shrugged, turning back to the coffee maker, the picture of unconcern. "Fine. Take a day. Cool off. You'll see I did this for the right reasons. You'll come back." That was his final fatal miscalculation. He saw my shock as weakness. He saw my silence as acquiescence. He didn't see the steel that was hardening in my spine, the cold fury that was beginning to forge itself into a weapon. He thought I would cool off and come back to him, ready to accept my new role as the silent, indebted partner in his grand vision. He had no idea that I was walking out that door to burn his entire world to the ground. I didn't know how yet. But as I closed the door on our charming blue shutters and the life I thought I had, I made a silent vow. He would not get away with this. I would make him pay for every dollar, every sleepless night, every ounce of trust he had incinerated. The war had begun, and as I drove away down the tree-lined street, I didn't look back. I was already planning my first move, my mind a storm of strategy and nascent righteous revenge. The first few weeks were a desperate, humiliating scramble for solid ground in a world that had become quicksand. I stayed with my sister, Sarah, in her cramped but blessedly safe apartment in North Austin, sleeping on her couch and trying to piece together the fractured mosaic of my life. My days were spent on the phone, a maddening, circular journey through the bureaucratic hell of automated menus, hold music, and indifferent customer service representatives. I called the credit card companies first, my voice cracking as I repeated the story over and over. The conversations were all depressingly, infuriatingly similar. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the charges were made," a robotic voice from American Express would chirp. Since the perpetrator had access to your personal information, you'll need to file a police report for fraud and send us the case number." So I went to the police. I sat in a sterile beige room at an Austin Police Department substation on Muller Boulevard and told my story to a weary-looking officer named Chung, who typed with 2 fingers and sighed heavily every few minutes. He listened with a professional, detached sympathy that felt more like boredom, but at the end, he leaned back in his squeaky chair. "Look, Ms. Evans," he said, his tone heavy with experience, "I hear what you're saying. But this is a domestic dispute. He's your live-in partner. You shared a home. You shared finances. It's, he said, she said. We call this civil, not criminal. It's a messy one. Honestly, you need to get a lawyer." A lawyer? Of course. The one thing I absolutely could not afford, now that my credit was shot and my savings were non-existent. Liam had been clever. He had used our shared life as a shield, creating a messy, tangled situation that law enforcement didn't want to touch. He knew the system was not built to protect people in my exact situation. It was built to categorize problems into neat little boxes, and mine was labeled too complicated. The real battle, however, was with the bank. Frost Bank was an old Texas institution, solid and unmovable, and they were the ones who held the foreclosure notice, the executioner's axe hanging over the home I still technically co-owned. I scheduled a meeting, clinging to a naive hope that a face-to-face conversation, a heartfelt appeal to reason, might make a difference. I dressed in my most professional outfit, a black blazer and gray slacks, my hands trembling as I put on mascara, feeling like a child playing dress-up for a meeting with the principal. The branch I went to was in the heart of downtown, a gleaming temple of glass and steel on Congress Avenue. I was led to a small, airless office to meet with a man named Mr. Henderson, the branch's vice president. He was in his 50s, with a perfectly knotted tie and a face that seemed incapable of smiling, etched with permanent disapproval. I laid out the story, my voice shaking at first, then steadying as I presented the facts I had. I told him about Liam, the startup, the lies. I told him the signature on the loan documents was a forgery. I begged him to look at my previous financial history, my perfect credit score before all this began. He listened impassively, his fingers steepled, his eyes giving away nothing, just staring at a point somewhere over my left shoulder. When I was finished, he slid a piece of paper across the polished mahogany desk. It was a copy of the loan application. "Ms. Evans," he said, his voice as cold and hard as the marble floors in the lobby, "is this your social security number?" "Yes, but..." "Is this your date of birth? Your previous addresses? Your mother's maiden name?" He went down the list, every piece of personal information a nail being hammered into my coffin. It was all correct. Liam, living with me for 7 years, had known everything. He'd probably had my social security card memorized. The information is correct, the underwriting was sound, and the signature on file is a very close match to the one on your driver's license, Henderson continued, his tone final and utterly devoid of empathy. "As far as the bank is concerned, this is a legitimate loan. I'm sorry for your personal difficulties, but the debt is yours. We will begin foreclosure proceedings in 30 days. I walked out of that bank and into the oppressive Texas heat, my body numb, my mind screaming. That was it. The door hadn't just been closed, it had been slammed, bolted, and barricaded in my face. The system wasn't just failing me, it was actively working against me, siding with the man who had committed the crime because it was the path of least resistance for them. I got into my car and just sat there, staring blankly at the Austin skyline, the iconic Frostbank Tower ironically glinting in the sun. I felt utterly and completely powerless. Liam was untouchable. He had the law, the banks, and our shared history all working in his favor. He had built a fortress of lies around himself, and I was trapped outside, left to be devoured by the consequences. He would get his funding, build his company on the back of my ruin, and I would be left with a foreclosure, a bankruptcy, and a mountain of debt that would shadow me for the rest of my life. He hadn't just stolen from me, he had erased me, replacing my identity with that of a financial delinquent. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a bitter acid rising in my throat. I looked at that bank tower, a monument to the power and indifference that was about to crush me. And in that moment of absolute despair, something inside me shifted. The fear, the sadness, the shock. They all burned away in a flash of white-hot clarity, leaving behind something new, something hard and cold and sharp. It was rage. Pure, undiluted, glacial rage. It wasn't the hot, explosive kind that makes you scream. It was the quiet, patient, focused kind that makes you plan. I would not be a victim. I would not be a statistic in a police report or a name on a foreclosure list. I would not let him win. If the system was a fortress, I would find a crack. If the doors were closed, I would find a key. If they wouldn't listen to the victim, then I would have to give them a villain they couldn't possibly ignore. I started the car, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The 30-day clock was ticking. Fine, let it tick. Liam thought he was the visionary, the big thinker. He was about to find out what happened when a detail-oriented graphic designer, a woman who knew that the devil was always in the details, declared war. My objective was no longer just to survive. It was to dismantle him piece by agonizing piece. My sister's couch became my command center. My laptop, once a tool for creating beautiful logos and branding guides, was now a weapon of forensic accounting and legal research. I didn't have money for a lawyer, so I decided to become my own. I dove headfirst into the labyrinthine world of Texas property law, banking regulations, and identity theft statutes. I spent hours upon hours at the Austin Public Library's Central Branch, a gorgeous modern building that became my sanctuary, poring over legal textbooks that were so dry they felt like they could turn to dust in my hands. I learned the difference between a deed of trust and a mortgage, the legal requirements for a notarized signature, and the specific language of fraud as defined by the Uniform Commercial Code. I watched hours of YouTube videos from lawyers and ex-FBI agents explaining how to build a fraud case from the ground up, and my days became a blur of legal jargon and caffeine. Sarah would come home from her grueling nursing shifts to find me surrounded by piles of printed documents, highlighter pens strewn across the floor, my eyes red from staring at a screen, muttering to myself about affidavits and chain of custody. "Chloe, are you okay?" she'd ask, her voice laced with concern. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine," I'd reply, not looking up from a dense article about wire fraud. "I'm just working." It wasn't a lie. This had become my new job, the full-time, unpaid, all-consuming job of reclaiming my life and systematically destroying Liam's. My design background gave me an unexpected edge. I was trained to see patterns, to organize information visually, to find the single dissonant element in a complex composition. I started applying that thinking to the chaos Liam had created. He was arrogant, and arrogant people, I was learning, get sloppy. They believe so fully in their own brilliance that they can't imagine anyone being smart enough to catch them. I began a meticulous archaeological dig into our shared digital life. I combed through years of photos, emails on our old shared tablet I'd thankfully brought with me, and cloud accounts I still had access to. The first major break came from an unexpected place, the recycling bin, in the home office I had abandoned. During one tense, prearranged visit to retrieve more of my things, a 30-minute window where Liam had agreed to be out of the house, I methodically went through the trash, and there it was, crumpled at the bottom beneath junk mail and takeout menus. It was a printed draft of the loan application from Frostbank. He had printed it to practice my signature, and then, in his monumental carelessness, had simply tossed it. On the back of the page were his attempts, dozens of them, some scratchy and uncertain, others getting closer and closer to the real thing. It was a forger's worksheet, a smoking gun. I carefully smoothed out the paper, placed it in a protective plastic sleeve I'd brought for this exact purpose, and felt the first real surge of hope course through my veins. This was evidence. Tangible, undeniable proof of premeditation. Next, I focused on the money. Where did it all go? I cross-referenced the credit card statements with Liam's calendar and our old text messages, building a timeline of his deceit. The $10,000 Rolex wasn't just a watch. He'd bought it the same day he texted me that he was stuck in an all-day investor meeting that's a total drag. The trip to Napa wasn't a business expense. I found an email on the tablet from his friend Mark, thanking him for the epic birthday weekend and mentioning something about a girl named Ashley from the hotel bar. He was living a second life, funded by my credit, a life that possibly included other women. He wasn't just using the money to save his business, he was using it to project an image of success he hadn't earned, building a fantasy life on a foundation of my future debt. He was a fraud in every sense of the word. The most crucial piece of the puzzle, I knew, was proving the forgery to an undisputed legal standard. The practice sheet was damning, but I needed an expert. I used what little savings I had left, a few $1,000s I'd kept in a personal account he didn't know about, to hire a certified forensic document examiner, a woman out of Dallas who had testified in federal court cases. I mailed her the original foreclosure notice from the bank and a dozen samples of my real signature from old checks, contracts, and even my passport application. A week later, her report arrived in my email. It was a 12-page, jargon-filled document, but the conclusion was written in plain, devastating English. It is my professional opinion, with a high degree of certainty, that the signature on the loan document is a forgery created through a process of deliberate simulation. I printed the report, my hands steady this time. I had the practice sheet, the expert analysis, the paper trail of his spending, and printouts of his deceptive emails and texts. I now held the full anatomy of his crime in a neatly organized, tabbed binder. But what to do with it? The police had already dismissed me. Taking Liam to civil court myself would take years and cost a fortune I didn't have. Then, sitting there at Sarah's dining table, surrounded by my arsenal of evidence, I remembered the cold, dismissive face of Mr. Henderson at Frostbank. His words echoed in my mind. As far as the bank is concerned, this is a legitimate loan. That was the key. They didn't see me. They only saw a defaulted loan. A liability on their books. They were a corporation, driven not by justice, but by profit and loss. And right now, I was in their loss column. It was then that a new strategy began to form. A plan so audacious and terrifying, it made my heart race. I wasn't going to fight the bank anymore. I wasn't going to plead for their help. I was going to become their solution. I was going to walk back into that lion's den, not as a lamb pleading for mercy, but as a hunter, offering them bigger, more profitable prey. I was going to make Frostbank the institution that was threatening to ruin me, the instrument of my revenge. My target was no longer just Liam. It was the entire system he had so confidently and cruelly manipulated. Executing my plan required a complete transformation. I couldn't be the tearful, victimized Chloe who had met with Mr. Henderson. I had to become someone else, a cold, calculating, and utterly professional stranger. I spent an entire week preparing not just my evidence, but myself. I bought a new, sharp, dark gray pantsuit on sale at Nordstrom Rack, my armor. I rehearsed my pitch in front of a mirror until there was no trace of hesitation in my voice, no hint of the emotional turmoil raging inside me. I had to strip all the personal pain out of it and present it as a pure business proposition. I wasn't asking for help, I was offering a deal. I bypassed the local branch entirely. Mr. Henderson was a foot soldier. I needed a general. After hours of digging on LinkedIn, cross-referencing with articles in the Austin Business Journal, I identified my target, Maria Flores, the Senior Vice President of Fraud and Risk Management for the bank's entire Central Texas region. Getting a meeting was a challenge. Her executive assistant, a woman named Brenda, was a formidable gatekeeper with a voice that could curdle milk. I didn't mention my foreclosure or my personal case. I simply stated, using the most corporate jargon I could muster, that I had a comprehensive third-party intelligence brief regarding a multi-account fraud case that represented a significant and as yet unidentified liability to the bank. I added that I needed just 15 minutes of Ms. Flores' time to present a cost-effective solution. The buzzwords worked. Intrigued by the mystery and the promise of efficiency, she granted me a meeting for the following Tuesday. I walked into the Frost Bank Tower a second time. The lobby felt different. Now, it wasn't intimidating. It was just a place of business, and I was there on business. I was led up to the executive floors, a world of hushed carpets, expensive, abstract art, and panoramic views of the city. Maria Flores was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a perfectly tailored dress that probably cost more than my first car. She didn't offer pleasantries. She gestured to a leather chair in front of her massive desk and said, "Brenda said you have a solution to a problem I don't know I have. You have 15 minutes." I didn't waste a second. I placed my binder on her desk. It was meticulously organized, with color-coded tabs and a table of contents. It looked exactly like the kind of proposal she probably saw every day. "Ms. Flores," I began, my voice even and calm, a perfect imitation of a confident professional. "My name is Chloe Evans. A few weeks ago, your bank initiated foreclosure proceedings against me for a loan of $150,000, which I am here to tell you is fraudulent." I saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, the "not another one of these" look I was expecting. But I didn't give her a chance to interrupt. "I am not here today to ask you to believe me," I continued, leaning forward slightly, making eye contact and holding it. "I am here to present you with a fully packaged legal case that proves it. More importantly, I'm here to offer you a clear, direct, and significantly more profitable path to recovering your money than foreclosing on a house and fighting a wronged party in court." I opened the binder with a crisp snap. Tab A, a signed, notarized report from a court-certified forensic document examiner confirming the signature on your loan document is a forgery. Her eyes widened slightly. I flipped the page. Tab B, evidence of premeditation. These are high-resolution scans of the loan application retrieved from the perpetrator's trash, showing dozens of attempts at practicing my signature. I saw her lean forward, her professional curiosity now fully engaged. Tab C, a complete financial breakdown of where your money actually went. Credit card statements in my name, also fraudulent, detailing luxury goods, 5-star hotel stays, and expensive dinners, all cross-referenced with emails and text messages from the perpetrator, Liam Porter, proving he was using these funds for personal enrichment while claiming they were for his business. I kept my tone clinical, detached, as if I were presenting a case study about a stranger, not the man who had destroyed my life. Tab D, preliminary asset tracking on Mr. Porter. He has funneled some of the funds into a private storage unit holding valuable tech equipment, and I have reason to believe he is in the final stages of securing a new round of venture capital funding. In short, he has liquidity and is actively courting more. I, on the other hand, do not. I closed the binder and looked her directly in the eye. "So, you have two options. Option 1 is to proceed with the foreclosure against me. I will fight you. I will use this binder of evidence to countersue Frost Bank for negligence in your verification process. It will be a messy, public, and expensive legal battle that will likely take years, and your own expert will have to testify that your bank approved a major loan on a demonstrably forged signature. Your chances of winning are, frankly, not great, and the reputational damage could be significant. I paused, letting the threat hang in the air between us. Or, there is option 2. You drop all proceedings against me immediately. In return, I will sign this entire binder of evidence over to your legal team. I will provide a sworn affidavit and serve as your star witness. You can then pursue Liam Porter for the full amount of the loan, plus damages, legal fees, and penalties for fraud. You will be suing the actual criminal who has actual assets. It will be a swift, clean, and far more profitable case for you to win. I pushed the binder gently across the desk. This isn't just my problem, Ms. Flores. This is a gift-wrapped solution to yours. The choice is yours. The 15 minutes were up. I had said everything I needed to say. Maria Flores stared at the binder, then up at me, a slow, calculated smile spreading across her face. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just been shown an easier, fatter kill. Ms. Evans, she said, her voice holding a newfound note of respect, let me get my legal team on the line. I walked out of that office knowing with absolute certainty that I had just turned the most powerful weapon they had against me into the weapon I would use to destroy him. The hunter had given the lions a new, better target. The aftermath of that meeting was shockingly swift. The wheels of corporate justice, once I had pointed them in the right direction, moved with a terrifying and beautiful efficiency. Within 48 hours, I received a letter via courier from Frostbank's legal department. It was a single page, written in dense legalese, but the message was clear. It stated that, pending my full cooperation, all collection and foreclosure activities against me were suspended indefinitely. The relief was so immense, it almost brought me to my knees right there in Sarah's living room. It wasn't a full victory yet, but the axe was no longer hanging over my head. I spent the next 2 weeks working with their lawyers. They weren't my friends. They were my allies of convenience. They were a team of sharp, ruthless sharks from a top firm in Dallas, and their only motivation was their client's bottom line. They deposed me for hours, picking apart every detail of my story, every piece of evidence. I handed over everything, the crumpled practice sheet, the handwriting expert's report, my logs of his spending, the passwords to the shared cloud accounts. I was an open book, a weapon being sharpened. For their use, they were delighted. I had done 90% of their work for them. They saw Liam not as a person, but as a financial target, and my binder was a treasure map showing exactly where to dig. The plan for the climax was not mine, but it was more poetically just than anything I could have ever devised. Liam's startup was hosting a major demo day at the Capitol Factory, a well-known tech incubator and co-working space that occupied the top floors of the Omni Hotel downtown. It was his big moment, the culmination of his desperate scrambling for new funding, his last chance to save his fraudulent empire. He would be on stage, pitching his vision to a room full of Austin's most prominent venture capitalists and angel investors, the very people he was trying to fool with the money he'd stolen from me. The bank's lawyers, recognizing the strategic value of maximum public humiliation, arranged for the process server to deliver the lawsuit at that exact moment. I wasn't there, of course. My presence would have complicated the narrative. Instead, I sat in a nearby coffee shop on Congress Avenue, a place called Houndstooth, my phone on the table, a cold brew clutched in my trembling hand. A friend of mine who worked in the tech scene was in the audience, providing me with a live text feed. At 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. He's on stage, full house. He's killing it. The investors are eating it up. He's so damn charming. My heart pounded in my chest. For a terrifying second, I wondered if he would somehow get away with it. if his charisma would win again. Another buzz. Wait, some guy in a suit is walking up to the stage. Security is moving toward him, but he looks official. And then the text I had been waiting for, the words that would signal the end of his world. Just handed him a stack of papers, said, "Liam Porter, you've been served," right into the hot mic. The whole room heard it. He's just frozen, staring. I could picture it perfectly. The bright spotlight on Liam's face, the confident smirk melting into stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. The investors looking around at each other, whispering, pulling out their phones to Google his name. The carefully constructed facade of his success, the image he had sacrificed my entire life to maintain, shattering in an instant under the harsh glare of public exposure. The lawsuit wasn't just for the $150,000. The bank's lawyers, in their corporate wisdom, had added counts for fraud, punitive damages, and racketeering. The total sum they were suing him for was well over $1 million. But that was just the beginning. As promised, an anonymous tip, complete with a digital copy of my evidence binder, was delivered to the State Attorney General's office and the Austin Business Journal that same afternoon. The civil lawsuit was the public execution. The criminal investigation and the press coverage would be the burial. His life as he knew it was over. He wouldn't just be broke, he would be a pariah. No investor in Austin or anywhere else would ever touch him again. His name would be synonymous with fraud. He had forged my name on a loan document, and in return, I had orchestrated the forgery of his entire identity, replacing visionary entrepreneur with common thief in the eyes of the only world he cared about. I paid for my coffee, left a $20 bill as a tip, and walked out into the afternoon sun. I didn't feel elation or joy. I felt a profound, quiet, and bone-deep sense of completion. The scales had finally been balanced. Months dissolved into a year. The legal battles raged on, but they were distant storms, phenomena I observed from a safe harbor. The bank, with its army of lawyers and my perfect, undeniable evidence, won a summary judgment against Liam. His assets were seized. The Rolex, his car, the contents of his storage unit. His company was dissolved, its patents and assets sold off for pennies on the dollar to satisfy the debt. The criminal case was even more brutal. Faced with the mountain of evidence, he pleaded guilty to felony fraud and forgery to avoid a longer sentence. He was sentenced to 3 years in a state prison. The house in Zilker, our house, was sold. The bank took its share, and with the little that was left, I was able to pay off a fraction of the other debts he'd racked up in my name. It would take years to rebuild my finances, but for the first time since that white envelope arrived, I felt like I could breathe again. I left my old job, unable to face the pitying looks and whispers any longer, and started my own small, one-woman design studio from my sister's spare room. After a few months, I had enough clients to move into a modest apartment in East Austin with a small balcony overlooking a canopy of live oak trees. It was mine. The lease had only my name on it. Every bill was mine. Every piece of furniture was mine. Every dollar I earned was mine. The solitude felt like a luxury, like safety. One crisp fall morning, a letter arrived. It was on official Frostbank letterhead. It was a dry, formal notice confirming that my name had been fully cleared of all fraudulent debts and the associated negative marks had been expunged from my credit history. It was officially, finally over. Tucked inside the envelope, I found a check made out to me for $500. It was marked Witness Fee, Frostbank versus Liam Porter. I stared at it for a long time, the irony so thick and bitter, it was almost funny. He had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, my home, my security, and 7 years of my life. And in the end, his conquerors had paid me a small fee for my services in his destruction. I walked over to the balcony and looked out at the city. Far in the distance, I could see the downtown skyline, the gleaming glass tower of the bank that had almost destroyed me. They paid me $500 to watch them. Take him for over $1 million. The end.